The storm came without warning. One moment, the Texas panhandle stretched out flat and indifferent under a bruised sky. The next, the world turned black, not night black, but something older and meaner than that. The kind of darkness that swallows a man whole and spits out only his boots. Caleb Doss had ridden through worse. Or so he told himself. He was 3 days out of Amarillo, 2 days past Caring, and somewhere between a man with a destination and a man running from one. His horse, a gray mare named November, had stopped trusting the sky an hour ago. Her ears had gone flat. Her breath came in short, nervous bursts. Animals always knew first. Then he saw the stagecoach. It sat tilted at the edge of a dry wash, one wheel snapped clean off, luggage scattered across the red dirt like the aftermath of something violent. The horses were gone, cut loose or spooked into the black wall of the incoming storm. The driver was gone too. No blood. No tracks. Just absence. Caleb pulled November to a stop and sat very still. He'd learned a long time ago that scenes like this were either accidents or bait. The Texas frontier didn't offer a third option. He should have ridden on. He knew that. Every instinct hammered into him by 12 years of hard living told him to tip his hat to the wreck and keep moving. Whatever happened here wasn't his trouble. He had enough of his own, the kind that followed a man on horseback with a wanted poster in its hand. But then he heard it. Beneath the moan of the coming wind. Beneath the distant crack of thunder rolling across the flatlands like God clearing his throat. A sound so small and so human that it stopped him cold. Someone was crying inside that coach. Caleb Doss sat there on November's back for a long moment, rain beginning to spot the dust around him in dark circles, and he made a decision that would change everything. He just didn't know that yet. The door of the stagecoach hung at a crooked angle, half ripped from its upper hinge. Caleb dismounted slowly, keeping his right hand loose near the colt on his hip, not drawing, just reminding himself it was there. Old habit. The kind that kept a man breathing. He called out before he got close. "Hello inside. I'm coming to the door. I'm not armed with anything but questions." That was a lie. He was armed with considerably more than that. But it tended to put people at ease, and ease was what he needed right now. The crying stopped. That was almost worse. He reached the door and pulled it open the rest of the way, the broken hinge screeching like something wounded. Inside, huddled against the far panel with her knees drawn up and both hands clutching a small carpet bag to her chest, was a woman. Young, mid-20s, maybe. Dark hair plastered to her face from sweat or rain or both. Her dress had once been fine, cream-colored with small blue flowers at the collar, but travel had punished it into something wrinkled and road-gray. Her eyes were the color of river water under cloud cover, not quite gray, not quite green, full of something complicated. She looked at him the way people look at a fire when they can't decide if they're going to be warmed by it or burned. "The driver," she said. Her voice was steadier than he expected. "He left. He took the horses and he left. An hour ago, maybe more." "He say why?" "He said the storm would kill us and he wasn't dying for courier wages." She said it flatly, without drama. Like she'd already processed the betrayal and moved on to the practical problem of survival. Caleb respected that. "He was probably right about the storm," Caleb said. "He was a coward," she replied. Caleb almost smiled. "Those two things aren't exclusive, ma'am." He looked over his shoulder at the sky. The wall of dark had moved closer, a churning mass of dirt and electricity that the locals called a blue norther when it came with cold or a hubbub when it came with dust. This one seemed to be bringing both. The temperature had already dropped 10 degrees in the last 20 minutes. "We need to move," he said. "There's a rock formation about a mile north. I passed it an hour back. Big enough to shelter under. This coach won't hold against what's coming. I'm not going anywhere with a stranger." She said it evenly, but her grip on the carpetbag tightened. "Your other option is staying in this ditch alone." She looked at him. He looked at her. The wind picked up between them. "What's your name?" she asked. He hesitated for exactly one beat too long. "Caleb." She noticed the hesitation. He saw her notice it. Either of them spoke about it. "Eleanor Marsh," she said. "I'm traveling to Dun Creek. There's a man expecting me there." Something shifted in her face when she said it. Not quite pride, not quite dread. Something in between. "I'm to be married." Caleb reached up and offered his hand to help her down from the ruined coach. "Congratulations," he said, and meant precisely none of it. She took his hand. Her grip was firm. Calmer than any bride to be stranded in a Texas storm had any right to be. They moved fast. Caleb tied November's reins to Eleanor's wrist, not for control, but so the mare's body would break some of the wind for her. He walked on the outer side, taking the grit full in the face. The first real blast of the storm hit them when they were halfway to the rocks, a wall of sand and cold air that turned the world orange, and then brown, and then almost nothing. Eleanor didn't cry out. She leaned into it and kept walking. He found the rocks more by memory than sight, a cluster of red sandstone shelves that jutted from the flat earth like broken teeth. They squeezed into the deepest pocket, November pressed in behind them, and the storm swallowed the world outside in a roar that made conversation impossible. They sat with their backs against warm stone, close enough that their shoulders touched, and waited. Caleb used the time to think. He thought about Dun Creek. He knew the town, small, hard scrabble, built on cattle money and old grudges. He'd ridden through it twice. The second time, he'd left in a hurry. He thought about who in Dun Creek would be expecting a mail-order bride and had the money to arrange one. There were only a few men in that town with that kind of standing. One name surfaced, and he pushed it back down. Beside him, Eleanor had opened the carpetbag and was holding something small, a photograph, from the look of it, though he couldn't see the subject in the darkness of the overhang. "Is that him?" Caleb asked. He had to lean close and raise his voice over the wind. She looked at the photograph for a moment before answering. "I've never met him," she said. "This is my mother." She tucked the photograph back inside the bag and closed the clasp. "She died 6 weeks ago. This trip was already arranged before she passed." "I didn't. There wasn't anything to stay for." She said it simply. No performance. No invitation to pity. Just a fact stated cleanly, like a woman who had already made her peace with it and moved on. Caleb looked at her profile, the set of her jaw, the stillness in her hands, and revised every assumption he'd made in the last 20 minutes. This woman wasn't fragile. She wasn't naive. She wasn't simply a bride traveling west. She was someone who had burned the last bridge behind her and was now walking toward a shore she'd never seen. And he had a very bad feeling about what was waiting for her when she got there. The storm screamed. November pressed closer. The darkness held. And Caleb Doss kept his mouth shut about what he knew, because some truths were too heavy to drop on a person while the world was already trying to bury them. The storm lasted 4 hours. Caleb knew because he counted, not minutes, but the small things that marked time in the darkness. The way November's breathing slowed from panic to patience. The way the temperature dropped, then steadied, then began its slow crawl back. The way Eleanor Marsh went from rigid and alert to something that was almost sleep, her head tipping slightly before she caught herself each time and sat back up. She refused to fully sleep. He noticed that. She dozed in fragments, always snapping back to wakefulness like a woman who'd learned that unconsciousness had a cost. He'd known people like that before. People who'd been hurt badly enough that even rest felt like a gamble. When the wind finally thinned to something survivable, Caleb crawled to the edge of the overhang and looked out. The landscape had been rearranged. Dunes of red sand had built up against the southern face of the rock formation. The dry wash where the stagecoach had sat was now half buried. The air smelled like iron and something electrical, like the sky had been scorched from the inside. Gone, he said. Eleanor appeared beside him. She looked at the altered landscape without expression, then turned and started brushing the fine red grit from her dress with brisk, efficient strokes. How far is Dun Creek? She asked. From here? He looked at the sun, now visible as a pale disk through the haze. 2 days' ride. Maybe a day and a half if we push November. She said. Not a question. An observation. You don't have another horse? No. She looked at November, who was nosing at a patch of scrub grass with focused indifference. I don't. She turned to him with those river-colored eyes. Why are you going to Dun Creek? There it was. The question he'd been waiting for. He'd had 4 hours to prepare an answer, and he still didn't have a good one. Passing through, he said. To where? Somewhere with less weather. She studied him the way a person studies a locked box, not yet deciding whether to pick it or leave it. You hesitated when you gave me your name last night. Storm was loud. It wasn't that loud. She picked up her carpet bag and settled the strap over her shoulder. I'm not asking you to explain yourself, Caleb. I know what a man looks like when he's carrying something he's not ready to put down. My father looked like that for most of my life. She paused. I just want to know if I should be afraid of you. He thought about that seriously, the way she deserved to have it thought about. Probably not, he said. But I'd be lying if I told you there weren't people in this world who disagree with that answer. She considered this. Then she nodded once, as though he'd passed some internal test, and started walking toward November. They rode double because there was no other option. Eleanor sat behind him, the carpet bag across her lap, her hands resting lightly on her own knees rather than holding on to him. She balanced against his back with careful precision, close enough for necessity, not an inch closer than that. He appreciated the dignity in it. By midday, the sun had turned cruel. The panhandle offered no mercy in either direction, storms when it wanted to kill you, sun when it wanted to do it slower. They stopped at a creek that was more mud than water and let November drink while Caleb refilled his canteen through a bandana filter. Eleanor sat on a flat rock and unpacked something from the carpet bag, a small parcel wrapped in wax paper. She broke what was inside in half and held one portion out to him without a word. Hard biscuits. Travel bread. He took it. Tell me about Dun Creek, she said, staring at the muddy creek. Tell me what it's really like. What did the correspondents say? She almost smiled. Growing township. Strong cattle economy. Fine prospects for a family. She said each phrase with the flat precision of someone reciting from memory. The man I'm to marry, Henry Colton, the letter said he owned the largest ranch in the county. That he was a widower. That he was looking for a capable woman who wasn't afraid of hard work. Caleb chewed the hard biscuit and said nothing. You know that name, Eleanor said. Henry Colton. He kept chewing. Caleb. He swallowed. Set his hands on his knees. Looked at the muddy creek for a long moment. I know the name, he said. And Dun Creek is a real town. The Colton Ranch is real. The cattle money is real. He stopped. What's not real? He turned and looked at her directly, which was something he'd been avoiding, because Eleanor Marsh had a way of looking back that made evasion feel like hard work. The fine prospects part, he said quietly. That part might need some revision. She held his gaze. Is he a dangerous man? Caleb thought about the last time he'd seen Henry Colton. Thought about the back room of a Dun Creek saloon, a card table, and a debt that couldn't be paid in money. Thought about what Colton did to people who owed him things they couldn't repay. He's a powerful man, Caleb said carefully. In Dun Creek, those two words mean about the same thing. The creek bubbled. A hawk circled high overhead, riding a thermal in slow, patient spirals. Eleanor Marsh looked at the hawk for a long moment. Then she tucked what was left of her travel bread back in the wax paper, replaced it in the carpet bag, and stood up. Then we'd better get there before someone warns him I'm coming, she said. Caleb stared at her. Why would that matter? She looked down at him with an expression he couldn't entirely read, something between calculation and grief. Because I have questions for Henry Colton, she said. And I'd prefer he not have time to prepare his answers. She walked back toward November, and Caleb sat very still on the flat rock, wondering for the first time if he was the one who should be afraid. They made camp that night at the edge of a shallow canyon, red walls rising 40 feet on either side, the sky above narrowed to a dark ribbon shot through with stars. Caleb built a fire small enough to be practical and invisible, which was a skill he developed out of necessity. Eleanor arranged her side of the camp with the same brisk efficiency she brought to everything, using the carpetbag as a pillow after removing something from inside it, and holding it in her lap while she sat by the fire. It was a letter. Several letters, actually, folded and unfolded so many times the creases had become soft, almost translucent at the corners. The correspondence, she said without looking up. From Henry Colton. Or from whoever wrote them on his behalf. She looked up then. Men like that don't always write their own letters. No, Caleb agreed. They don't? Did you know my mother arranged this? She smoothed one of the letters across her knee. She was sick for 2 years. She spent the last of what she had on the correspondence fees. The agency. The travel. She touched the edge of the letter with one finger. She was convinced that the West meant a new start. That a woman alone in Ohio with nothing had no future, but a woman willing to travel, willing to work, could make one. She wasn't wrong about that, Caleb said. No. She wasn't wrong. Eleanor folded the letter back into its careful thirds. But she didn't ask the right questions about the man. What questions should she have asked? Eleanor looked at him across the fire. The flames carved her face into something sharper, more defined. His first wife, she said. I found a notice. A death notice in an old newspaper someone left in the stagecoach, weeks old, the ink faded. Margaret Colton, beloved wife, passed after a short illness. She let the pause breathe. Except in Dun Creek, they apparently say it differently. In Dun Creek, they say she fell. Caleb's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The stairs, Eleanor said, of the Colton ranch house. A 2-story home. She fell down the stairs. She placed the letters back in the carpetbag with precise, deliberate movements. And 7 months later, Henry Colton's name appeared in a matrimonial agency ledger. That's not proof of anything, Caleb said. It was the honest thing to say. No, she agreed. It's not. That's why I need to get there. That's why I need to look him in the face and see what I see. She met his eyes steadily. My mother sent everything she had so I could have a life, Caleb. I'm not going to run from it without knowing what I'm running from. And I'm not going to walk into it blind. He understood that. He understood it in a way that went deeper than words. He looked into the fire for a while, and then, because she had been honest with him and honesty deserved something back, he spoke. I knew Margaret Colton, he said. The fire popped. An ember drifted upward and disappeared. Eleanor went very still. Not well, Caleb continued. I passed through Dun Creek about 4 years back. Worked a week at the Colton Ranch, fence repair. Margaret brought water out to the hands in the afternoon. He turned a stick slowly in the fire. She was kind. Quiet. Had bruises on her wrist she'd covered with her sleeve, but the sleeve rode up when she poured from the bucket. He stopped. I didn't ask about them. I should have asked about them. The canyon held the silence respectfully. Is that why you left Dun Creek in a hurry the second time? Eleanor asked gently. He exhaled slowly. Second time I was there, Colton owed a man money. The man, a decent man, a rancher from outside town, came to collect. Colton had me arrested on a false charge to keep me from witnessing what happened next. He looked up from the fire. By the time I got clear of the jail, the rancher was gone. His land deed had transferred to Colton by the end of the week. Died intestate, the sheriff said. No family, no witnesses. He set the stick down. The sheriff works for Colton. Eleanor absorbed this the way she seemed to absorb everything, without drama, without collapse. Processing. Categorizing. Filing it somewhere useful. So you're going back? She said. I'm passing through, he said again. Caleb. He looked at her. You are going back, she said. You're not passing through anywhere. A man passing through doesn't ride 3 days across the panhandle in the direction of the town he was once jailed in. A man passing through takes the other road. She watched him. You're going back for something. Or someone. He said nothing for a long moment. The fire burned low between them. The rancher who disappeared, he finally said. His name was Daniel Webb. He had a daughter. 14 years old. When Webb vanished, Colton took the land and... He stopped. The daughter went to live with a cousin in Lubbock. But she's older now. She's been trying to get a lawyer to look at the land transfer for 2 years. She's been sending letters. He reached into his own coat and produced a single envelope, worn, creased, clearly read many times. I got this one 3 weeks ago. Eleanor looked at the envelope. Looked at him. You knew her? Webb was my friend, Caleb said simply. He helped me once when I had no reason to expect help from anyone. I owe him a debt I can't repay him directly anymore. The fire had burned down to orange coals. Above the canyon walls, the stars were absolute and cold. Well then, Eleanor said quietly, settling back against the carpetbag. It seems we're both going to Dunn Creek for complicated reasons. Caleb looked at the coals for a long time. Ma'am, he said finally, I think you might be the most dangerous person I've met in a decade. She closed her eyes, and for the first time since the stagecoach, she almost smiled for real. Go to sleep, Caleb, she said. We have a long day tomorrow. Dunn Creek announced itself the way sick towns always did, gradually, and with false confidence. First came the smell, cattle, dust, and wood smoke. Then the sound, the distant clang of a smithy, the slow creak of a windmill. Then the physical town itself, rising from the flat earth as if it had grown there by accident and kept growing out of stubbornness. A main street of packed dirt. Storefronts with sun-bleached signs. A church at the far end with a bell that hadn't moved in what looked like years, its rope hanging limp in the dead afternoon air. It was the middle of the week, and the street was quieter than it should have been. Caleb had known towns like this before, towns where the silence wasn't peace, but pressure. Where people moved with their eyes down not from shyness but from practice, from the long education of knowing when to look and when to look away. He guided November to the trough outside the general store, dismounted, and helped Eleanor down. She straightened her dress and looked up and down the street with clear, measuring eyes. There, she said quietly. He followed her gaze. Down the street, above the false front of the largest building on the block, a 2-story structure that was half saloon and half office. The kind of architectural ambition that announced itself as important. A sign read, Colton Land and Cattle Co. In smaller letters below, H. Colton, proprietor. He runs the town, Caleb said. He is the town, Eleanor replied. They went to the general store first. Caleb bought supplies with what remained of the cash from his inside pocket, while Eleanor spoke quietly with the woman behind the counter, a round-faced woman in her 50s named Vera, who had the eyes of someone who kept secrets the way a cellar keeps water. Essential. Cold. Hidden. Eleanor asked about a boarding house. Vera gave her the name of one. Then Eleanor asked, softly and with a kind of practiced casualness, whether people in town were generally happy with the way things were run. Vera began rearranging cans that didn't need rearranging. Things run smooth here, Vera said. Mr. Colton looks after his own. And those who aren't his own. Eleanor asked. Vera looked up. Looked at Eleanor with a gaze that contained an entire conversation she wasn't willing to have out loud. Then she looked at Caleb, and something shifted in her expression, recognition, or something close to it. I'm going to need you to pay and go, Vera said quietly. I have a family. They paid and went. Outside, the afternoon sun was a hammer. Caleb pulled his hat brim down and steered them away from the main street toward the side road where, according to Vera's quickly given directions, the boarding house sat. She knew you, Eleanor said. I've been here before. She was afraid. Most people here probably are. The boarding house was run by a man named Garrett, thin, angular, with the careful neutral expression of a man who had long ago decided that having opinions was a luxury he couldn't afford. He gave Eleanor the room at the far end of the upstairs hall and gave Caleb a look that said he wasn't sure giving a room to either of them was wise. But money was money in a town where Colton's ranch bought its supplies elsewhere. Eleanor went upstairs. Caleb sat in the small downstairs parlor and waited until he heard her door close. Then he went back outside. He needed to see the land office. He found it on the side street, a narrow building wedged between a farrier and a shuttered dressmaker, its window filmed with dust. Inside, a young clerk with ink-stained fingers and the pale look of someone who spent too many hours in small rooms looked up with visible alarm at Caleb's entrance. Caleb put $3 silver on the counter. Land transfer records, he said. 2 years back. Property registered to Daniel Webb. The clerk stared at the silver dollars. Then he stared at Caleb. Then he very quietly said, Sir, those records are, I know what they are, Caleb said. I'm asking to see them. Mr. Colton doesn't own what's in the public record. Not legally. Caleb kept his voice even. Quiet. The way he spoke when he was serious. I'm not asking you to do anything that isn't within your legal rights. I'm asking you to show me a public document. That's all. The clerk looked at the silver dollars for a long moment. Then he went to the back of the room and pulled a ledger from a shelf with a hasty, furtive movement of someone doing something that felt dangerous even when it wasn't. The transfer was there. Caleb read it carefully. The signature on the transfer document, the one authorizing the conveyance of Webb's 400 acres to Colton, was witnessed by 2 names. One was the sheriff, a man named Aldous Trent. The other signature was illegible, scrawled with apparent haste. But the handwriting underneath, in the clerk's careful notation of who had filed the document, bore a name that stopped Caleb cold. He read it twice to make sure. Who filed this? He asked. Kept his voice flat. The clerk pointed to the notation. Attorney of record. Brought the paperwork in the morning after Mr. Webb passed. Had everything in order. This name, Caleb said. He's still in Dunn Creek? The clerk nodded slowly. Caleb stood back from the counter. He thought about Eleanor upstairs at the boarding house and what she told him about Margaret Colton and the stairs. He thought about Daniel Webb and the debt he owed a dead man. He thought about the name in the ledger, a name he hadn't expected, a name that rerouted everything he'd planned to do when he got to this town. He pushed one of the silver dollars back toward the clerk and kept the other 2. If anyone asks, he said, I was never here. The clerk was already putting the ledger away, and he didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. She was waiting for him in the parlor when he got back. Not sitting. Standing, with the carpet bag in her hands and her jaw set in a way he'd already come to recognize as Eleanor Marsh deciding something irrevocably. Henry Colton is coming here, she said. Tonight. Caleb stopped moving. How do you know? Vera came to the boarding house. She knocked on the back door and told the owner, who told me. Eleanor set the bag on the parlor table. Apparently word travels fast in a small town. Someone saw us arrive. Someone told him there was a woman matching my description. She met his eyes. He knows his bride is here. He'll expect you to come to the ranch. He'll come here first. Vera said he always meets new arrivals personally. She said the last word with a precision that communicated exactly how she felt about it. Caleb thought fast. That changes things. Tell me what you found in the land office. He'd been going back and forth on this, the question of how much to tell her and when. He made the calculation before that she was capable of handling truth, and nothing that had happened in 3 days had changed that assessment. But the name in the ledger was going to land hard, and hard landings required solid ground underneath. Sit down, he said. I prefer to stand. He looked at her. Decided not to argue. The transfer documents on Webb's land were filed by an attorney. An attorney who had everything prepared and ready the morning after Webb died. He paused. His name is Josiah Marsh. The room did not change. The light didn't shift. The old clock on the parlor shelf kept its slow, indifferent tick. But Eleanor's face did something complicated and devastating, a small internal collapse, visible only in the slight drop of her chin and the way her hands tightened on the carpetbag strap. Before she rebuilt herself in about 3 seconds flat. That's my uncle, she said. Her voice was level. Almost. Yes. My mother's brother. She set the bag down on the table because she needed somewhere to put her hands, and she spread them flat against the surface. He's been in the West for years. My mother, she corresponded with him. He recommended the matrimonial agency. He was the one who found the listing for Henry Colton. Caleb let the silence do its work. He arranged it, Eleanor said quietly. Josiah arranged my marriage. She looked up. And Josiah helped Colton steal a dead man's land. That's what the record shows. So whatever Colton gives Josiah, payments, a percentage. Something, my uncle earns it by providing Colton with useful things. Legal cover. Documents. And, she stopped. Pressed her lips together. And women. Caleb said nothing because she had arrived at the truth herself and interrupting would have been disrespectful. Margaret Colton, Eleanor said. Did Josiah arrange that marriage too? I don't know. But it's worth asking. She was quiet for a long moment. The clock ticked. Outside, the street sounds of Dunn Creek filtered through the thin walls. A horse, a distant voice, the creak of a wagon. My mother trusted him, she said finally. She was dying and she trusted him, and he sold me. She said it without tears, which somehow made it worse. She thought she was protecting me. She was trying to, Caleb said. She just didn't know what she was trusting him with. Eleanor stood up straight. The grief moved through her, and she let it, and then she set it aside with the same deliberate efficiency with which she arranged a camp or folded a letter. He was beginning to understand that this was not coldness. It was endurance. It was the discipline of a woman who had been absorbing losses for years and had learned to keep moving after each one. What do you need from me? She asked. The question surprised him. What? You came here for Webb's daughter. For the land. You have documentation showing an illegal transfer. You need witnesses, presumably. You need someone to testify or to help you get the information to the right authority. She looked at him with clear, frank eyes. What do I have that you need? He almost told her she didn't owe him anything. But she wasn't offering charity, she was offering a transaction between two people who needed the same thing, and he respected her enough to treat it that way. If Colton comes here tonight expecting to meet his bride, Caleb said slowly, you could give me 10 minutes inside the Colton Land and Cattle Office. Unobserved. If there are other documents, other transfers, other women's names, any pattern that shows what he and Josiah have been doing, I can get them to a federal circuit judge. The district court in Amarillo has jurisdiction over land fraud. If the case is strong enough, even Trent can't bury it. You can get in? She said. I can get in. And you need him occupied. Him and anyone he brings. Eleanor looked at the carpetbag. She thought. And then she did the thing Caleb hadn't expected. she began to laugh. Soft, private, humorless, but real. The laugh of someone who has just seen the full shape of the trap they've been put in, and decided the only way forward was through it. "He came west looking for a compliant woman," she said. "Someone without family, without resources, without anyone to ask uncomfortable questions." She picked up the carpetbag and headed for the stairs. "I'll be ready when he arrives. Eleanor." She stopped. He looked up at her from the bottom of the stairs. "This is dangerous. Colton is dangerous." "If anything goes, my mother spent everything so I could have a life, Caleb," she said quietly from the landing. "I intend to have one." She went up the stairs. Caleb stood in the empty parlor and listened to the clock, and thought about what was coming, and decided that whatever happened next, he was done standing at the edge of other people's trouble and watching. Some debts didn't care whether you were ready to pay them. Henry Colton arrived at the boarding house at 7 in the evening. He was not what you'd picture if someone said the name Henry Colton, not rough, not brutish, not the obvious shape of a dangerous man. He was tall and narrow, perhaps 50, with silver hair combed back cleanly and a dark coat that had cost real money. He had the face of a man who had spent decades being reasonable in public. Steady eyes the color of old wood. Hands that were soft on the surface and showed their strength only in how they gripped things. He came with 2 men. They waited outside. He came in alone, which was its own kind of confidence. Garrett, the owner, showed him to the parlor. Eleanor was there, sitting in the chair nearest the lamp, the light arranged so it fell well on her face. She had pinned her hair up and changed into the best of what she had in the carpetbag, a dark blue dress, travel-worn but presentable. She sat with her hands folded and the carpetbag at her feet, and she looked, Caleb thought from the hallway where he stood out of sight, like a woman who had prepared for this conversation from a great distance, and for a very long time. He slipped out through the back. He had 10 minutes. Maybe 12 if Eleanor was good. She was good. He heard Colton's voice as he left, low, smooth, the voice of a man accustomed to sounding like he was doing you a favor, and he didn't look back. The Colton Land and Cattle Office was 2 blocks down and across the main street. At this hour, the front door was locked, but the back window had a latch that was more decorative than functional, and Caleb was through it in under a minute. He used a small candle stub and moved fast through the back office. Filing cabinets. He went to the ones in the rear, the ones that weren't meant to be seen quickly, the ones a casual search wouldn't reach. The 3rd drawer. It was organized with the care of someone who understood that their record-keeping was also their protection, everything properly dated, properly witnessed, legally formatted. Which meant that if you knew what to look for, it was all there. 6 land transfer documents. 3 going back 4 years. All following the same pattern, a death, a debt, a quick conveyance. All witnessed by Josiah Marsh, attorney at law. 2 letters signed by Josiah Marsh referencing the matrimonial arrangement and appropriate compensation upon delivery. The word delivery. Like cargo. A letter from Colton to a matrimonial agency in Cincinnati, not the same one that had arranged Eleanor, but another, referencing a previous placement. A woman named Clara Hendricks. Placed 14 months ago. No subsequent correspondence, which meant no subsequent woman. Caleb folded everything carefully into the inside pocket of his coat. His hands were steady. His heart was not. He was back on the street in 8 minutes. He was almost at the boarding house when the 2 men who had come with Colton stepped out of the shadow of the alley beside the farrier. They were not subtle about their intentions. "Mr. Colton would like a word," the larger one said. "With me?" Caleb kept his voice casual. "With whoever was riding with the woman." "Someone saw you come in together." The man's hand rested on his holster. "Not drawing. Not yet. He's particular about knowing who his people associate with." "She's not his people," Caleb said. The second man took a step sideways, beginning the geometry of surrounding. Caleb tracked the movement without looking directly at it. "What's your name?" the larger one said. "Caleb Doss." The name landed. He watched it happen, the flicker of recognition, of recalibration. They'd heard it before. Which meant Colton had mentioned him at some point, which meant Colton knew he was the one who'd seen too much 4 years ago. That was information. The larger man's hand tightened on his holster. Caleb drew in one motion, not the theatrical, slow-build draw of the story books, but the practiced, economical movement of a man who had done it thousands of times in his life, and whose body had memorized the mechanics completely. The Colt was in his hand before either man finished reaching. "I'm going to walk back to the boarding house," Caleb said quietly. "You're going to let me. And then you're going to go back to Henry Colton and tell him that the woman in the parlor isn't what he arranged for. And that whatever he has planned for tonight would benefit from serious reconsideration." The two men looked at each other. "He won't like that," the smaller one said. "I imagine not." Caleb began walking backwards, keeping them in view. "He's going to like the Federal Circuit Court considerably less." He backed to the boarding house door, stepped inside, and moved to the parlor. Eleanor was standing. Colton was standing. The conversation had departed from civility. He could see it in the color in Colton's face and the set of Eleanor's shoulders. "We're leaving," Caleb said. Colton turned. Saw the Colt. Saw the expression on Caleb's face. And did the calculation that men like him were good at, the calculation of whether the risk was acceptable and what it would cost. "You have no idea what you're involving yourself in," Colton said. "I have some idea," Caleb said. He patted his coat, where the documents sat. "I have quite specific idea, actually." Something shifted in Colton's steady wooden eyes, the first real emotion he'd shown. Not anger. Fear. The particular fear of a man watching a structure he's spent years building begin to develop a crack at its foundation. "That document is private property," he said. "The land that backs them isn't," Caleb said. Eleanor picked up the carpetbag. She walked past Henry Colton without looking at him, not from avoidance, but from the precise and deliberate refusal to grant him the weight of her attention. She walked to the door and waited. Caleb kept his eyes on Colton until he backed through the door after her. They were on November and moving inside 3 minutes, heading north out of Dunn Creek in the cooling dark. Caleb planned to ride through the night. He had a contact in a town 30 miles north, a man who knew a Federal Circuit judge by name and by handshake. Eleanor rode behind him this time with her hands at his waist, not from intimacy but from necessity. The speed was different now, the urgency different, and she held on because they were moving. Behind them, Dunn Creek's lights were small and still. "Clara Hendricks," Eleanor said against the wind. "The name in the letters. What happened to her?" He rode for a moment before answering. "I don't know," he said. "That's the next thing we find out." She tightened her grip slightly, not from fear. From resolve. The Texas dark swallowed the lights of Dunn Creek entirely. The Federal Circuit judge received the documents in his chambers in Amarillo on a Tuesday morning. He read them without expression, which was the professional habit of a man who had seen much and allowed himself to react to little. When he finished, he set them on his desk, folded his hands, and said 4 words. "Get me the sheriff." Not the Dunn Creek sheriff. The territorial marshal. Henry Colton was arrested 16 days later. Josiah Marsh was arrested in the same week in Lubbock, where he had an office and a practiced reputation and a life built on the exploitation of people who needed help and reached out to the wrong hand. The land deeds were reviewed. 3 properties, including Daniel Webb's 400 acres, were ordered returned to their rightful heirs. Webb's daughter, a young woman named Rose who had spent 2 years writing letters that most people never answered, received the deed to her father's land on a Wednesday morning and reportedly sat with it in her hands for a long time before she spoke. The 2 names that had witnessed the fraudulent transfers were struck from the legal record. The Colton land and cattle sign came down. Dun Creek breathed differently after that. Slowly, cautiously, the way a town does when it remembers that it existed before the thing that was crushing it, and might exist after. Caleb Doss appeared before the circuit court to give his testimony. He gave it clearly and without embellishment, and answered every question. Afterward, the federal prosecutor looked at him across the table and said that in his professional assessment, Caleb Doss was a man who had done a good thing and would probably leave before anyone could thank him for it. He was right. Eleanor Marsh stayed. Not in Dun Creek, in Amarillo, where she found work in a law office. An administrative position, initially. Within 6 months she was drafting correspondence. Within a year, the attorney she worked for called her the sharpest legal mind he'd encountered who hadn't passed the bar, and said it without irony. She wrote to Rose Webb. They exchanged letters for years. She wrote to Caleb once, to a general address he'd left with the federal court. The letter found him eventually. The West was wide but mail was persistent. You once told me you were just passing through. I didn't believe you then. I'm sure you've found somewhere to be by now. I hope it has less weather. Yem. He read it twice. Folded it carefully along its original creases. Put it in his inside coat pocket. He was sitting on the porch of a small ranch house in eastern New Mexico when he read it. The ranch had belonged to a man who owed him 3 years of back wages and had paid with land instead of coin. It was 40 acres of hard ground, a house with 1 sound wall and 3 that needed work, and a view of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains that turned pink and then purple every evening like they were apologizing for the day. It wasn't much. He was fixing it. He wrote back. Less weather. More work. Both fine. The mountains are worth seeing if you come this way. CD. He didn't know if she would come. He didn't know if he deserved the kind of thing that might happen if she did. He had a past that carried weight the way old stone carries cold. Long after the frost is gone, the chill lingers in the rock. But Eleanor Marsh had walked into a storm without flinching. She had ridden toward danger because she needed answers and because she'd decided she had the right to survive with her eyes open. She had sat across a fire from a wanted man and offered him half her biscuit and said simply, I just want to know if I should be afraid of you. And he had said probably not. He still believed that. He set the letter inside the house on the table that was still mostly level and went back to work on the east wall, fitting stones into the gaps where the mortar had crumbled. Rebuilding something that had fallen apart from neglect. Some things can be rebuilt. Some damage doesn't go back the way it came. The question a man has to ask himself is whether the thing is worth the work, and whether he's the one to do it. He thought he might be. The mountains turned pink. Then purple. The sky above New Mexico went deep and clear and full of stars. Caleb Doss picked up another stone, fit it into place, and kept building. Hope, it turns out, is not a feeling. It's a decision. Made in the dark, in a storm, with nothing certain and everything at stake. Eleanor Marsh made it. A tired, wanted man found it in an abandoned stagecoach on the Texas Panhandle. And that, more than anything else, is why the world didn't swallow them both.